So he's been saying that it's going to be costly for...
Plans by a section of MPs to abolish the Senate continue to raise eyebrows, with the Kenya Human Rights Commission adding its voice to the controversial proposal. The NGO argues that the motion seeks to frustrate the reform agenda by abolishing structures meant to promote accountability.
There is need to know the devastating effect of what Honorable Kioni and others are proposing, since it is important to consider the role of the Senate as envisaged in the Constitution. Article 96, sub-article 3 of the Constitution identifies the role of the Senate as being 1. To determine the allocation of national revenue among counties, as provided for in Article 217. And secondly, to exercise oversight over national revenue allocated to the county governments. If there is no Senate, who will negotiate with the National Assembly on how much of national revenue should be allocated to counties? Do Kenyans at community level, particularly in the less developed counties, want to place the fate of their development in the hands of members of the National Assembly, who have in the past demonstrated their inability to defend the interests of the people? Fourth, and as a consequence of the aforementioned, without the Senate, Kenya will have literally killed devolution of power, because the financial fate of counties will rest solely with the National Assembly. It is important to note that the Senate has been created to represent the counties and protect their interests, as well as those of the marginalized and special interest groups. Kenyans cannot trust the National Assembly alone to do this, because their track record indicates otherwise.
She says the motion seeks to remove the system of checks and balances placed in a bicameral system, replacing it with a unicameral one.
There's actually a separation of powers within Parliament itself. And the National Assembly cannot play that role. Also, when you have a multicultural, multi-ethnic society, which Kenya has, and this is a society where we've had deep-seated grievances about equality and access to resources, one of the ways you ensure inclusion, one of the recognized democratic mechanisms for ensuring inclusion and participation, is through having a bicameral house, because it offers you another opportunity for representation.
Although the motion's Mumia Kioni argues that a bicameral system risks duplicating roles, Chesoni notes that there's a clear demarcation of power between the two houses. Kioni also argues that the system will place a huge financial burden on taxpayers, but the Kenya Human Rights Commission says that the benefits of a decentralized system outweigh the concerns.
The role of the National Assembly and the role of the Senate are carefully demarcated. They are two different institutions within Parliament to do different roles. There is no way you can say that we already have this one, so why do we need this one? I think first that's a simplistic arguing. It cannot hold any water. If you look at the roles of the National Assembly vis-a-vis the roles of the Senate. The other argument which I've heard, that it is expensive. I think we have known how expensive it is to run a centralized government. Expensive in the nature of people are still poor, people are still ignorant, people are still facing diseases. Kenya has not moved an inch. In some places there are no roads, there are no hospitals. Women have to walk 10 miles to go and fetch water. Communities live in very insecure conditions in Isiolo, the most recent. Having a house to protect the interests and the rights of Kenyans, I don't think it's expensive, because that county government, which will be represented at the Senate level, should be able to get all monies possible. And I will end by saying the Senate, according to Article 217, will determine the monies of at least 15% every 5 years. But of course, remember in the schedule, transitional schedule, it is clear in the first 2 decisions made by the Senate, the difference will be only 3 years. So we are saying between 2012 and 2017, there is possibility of 2018, there is possibility of raising that money to a higher level, not 15%, perhaps maybe even 40%. It is expensive to retain a centralized system. It's expensive to retain a provincial administration, which does not work for the people. So for us, that argument, again, does not hold water, that it is expensive to have a Senate.
The motion, which requires a referendum, will be the second attempt to amend the Constitution. Reporting for Capital News, I'm Wambui Ndonga.